Thank you so much for joining me again this week. I am delighted to be joined by the artist Sophia Balagamwala, who is an artist, a curator, somebody whose work I've admired for a long, long time. I was first introduced to Sophia on Instagram, actually. Someone recommended I check out her work, and I did. And then Sophia and I scheduled a studio visit in Karachi, where Sophia lives and works. She did her bachelor's from the University of Toronto and a master's in fine arts from Cornell University, graduating in 2014, and has been living and working in Karachi ever since. She's had shows sort of across the world at this point. And I've been lucky enough to work with Sophia several times, actually, under Foundation Art Divvy and some of the projects that I do. And she's been very kind and generous to agree to be the second artist on these conversations I'm having. So I'm delighted that she's here. Now, Sophia's work is quite recognizable, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about it herself, and I'll let her do that. But in her bio, she often terms it as work that sort of lives in the space where history meets nonsense and fiction. And I think that's a very interesting description. Sophia is very interested in the idea of the archive, and we'll ask her some more questions about that. So Sophia, not only are you an artist, you're also a curator, you're a full-time teacher, you're a full-time mom, you're married. So you have quite a lot going on, but I thought we could first start off with one thing. Many of you hopefully have seen some of the images I've been putting up of Sophia's work on the Art Divvy page, on Sophia's own website. And I wanted to kind of get right to the crux of it, because you've become you've begun to focus on these particular men, generals in a sense, and also animals in your work. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that to start off with, a little bit about the Mustache general and kind of how he walked into your life. What was it that inspired you perhaps to paint that first painting?
So I think that I see the general, and he's not always a general. Sometimes he's usually a very decorated personality, but sometimes he's a bird, sometimes he's a beast. He's not always a man. He kind of moves back and forth between representations of what a man could or should be. The mustache comes and goes, as do different kinds of decorations, epaulets. But what this being exists in is part of this larger project, or this larger interest that I have in the history of the Indian subcontinent, but then also within the context of contemporary Pakistani or South Asian politics in the present, and sort of moving and questioning gender and power structures within the region and within these spaces. And I think it all stems from,
yeah. So it's very much steeped in history and a lot of research then, these figures that you create.
Yes, for sure. So I've always had a deep interest in history, and specifically in local histories. I have a background and I've worked with archives for almost 10 years or so. I used to work at the Citizens Archive, so I was very involved in looking at local archives of history within the Indian subcontinent, and then also very much in this idea of nation building through museum making, or through literature in terms of state curriculums, history books, in the different ways that stories or histories are presented. And you wouldn't necessarily think that by looking at my work, because it on a first glance has nothing to do with archives or histories, or the idea that, you know, it presents itself in a specific way, that the photograph, an old photograph, is black and white, or that it has this kind of authority. Because what I create is this world which is very fictitious and colorful and very wonky in a lot of ways. But I think that is the sort of crux of my project, that history is not flat, and history is not linear. And when we present it through projects of either museum building or otherwise, we tend to tell one story, and then that version of events is a lot of elements are either eliminated or exaggerated, and then I kind of clamp onto those exaggerations or those things that are missed out And so the world that emerges is a world that is very either over exaggerated or very oversimplified. So there are certain details and there are certain things that are very much reinforced. There are certain elements that come in, say like the jinnah cap is something that is that comes in again and again. Different kinds of mustaches and decorations, military decorations, they come in and out, but the way that they're, I guess, put together is in a way that's not traditional in any way. And the idea is to question how history is accepted to be this sort of linear story that is told to us for specific purposes.
Oh, interesting. It must also be so fascinating to create these figures from that point of view for you. And I'm sure you enjoy very much throwing in the sort of vivid colors that you use, exaggerating certain aspects of their features as well.
Yeah, I think the colors are something that also end up disarming the viewer in a way, because you don't expect to see, say, someone like a general or someone in a place of authority to be necessarily pastel colored and looking so harmless. And you know, I get to play around with their body parts, their faces, and a lot of my inspiration comes from children's books, including the palette, including the forms. Children's books, animations from the 1920s and 30s, and not just Pakistani animations, but global animations as well from that era. And then a lot of political caricature where you could get away with saying so much because the form was not necessarily threatening. And
It's
of the
very
way.
true. A lot of cartoons are often so much more political in nature, or also so much more vivid or sexual in nature than paintings can be, just because cartoonists can often get away with so much. And I think you're right about the idea of caricatures lending themselves very well to that critical analysis of society, of political events, of history, of archives. Do you often get surprised by how people react to the paintings and the works that you create? Are they often able to understand the archival historical analyses that you've really gone through in your work, or do you sometimes find that they relate more with the image itself?
I think it depends on who's looking at it. So I think what I am grateful for is the different kinds of readings of my work, because you can approach it from a very painterly perspective, or you can focus on the colors, or you can get these clues of history of certain signs and symbols that are representing specific people of a specific place. But then also there are people who are just drawn into the pastels and the play that's happening, because it is playful work. And I think it's funny because I've heard that a lot of people get these works for like a children's room. So I think it's kind of like strange, but also interesting that, you know, there's this general hanging in the room of a child. But
In a way, that's also nice that you're teaching kids about their colonial past and their history through your paintings. And in that sense, yeah, I know you've said that Dr. Seuss is one of your inspirations as well. And he too is quite forceful in that sense.
yeah, I mean, he has a very interesting history and contribution. So he was really instrumental in the animations of so in the two world wars. He was based in America, Theodore Giesel, and he was commissioned by the Warner Brothers studio, by the U.S. government, to create these training videos for the U.S. military. And his name was Private Snafu, and he was this very silly, ridiculous military man who would get into the worst of situations, and he was meant to illustrate you know, what a soldier in the US Army should not do. Also, a lot of these animations are pretty horrible in the essence, like a war was going on, so the enemy is always presented in a pretty horrible, very racist way. So, you know, you have to see that as well. But yeah, his work was used as very specifically as a political and training tool within the wars, within that context. So
Very, very interesting. Sophia, I wanted to ask you as well how your work has transformed over the years. I know that you've dabbled in sort of course, paintings, the figures, you move into birds. For a couple of shows that I've seen, you've also started dabbling in, can I give it away, ceramics in a sense. So I wanted to know a little bit about the progression, and also actually, I suppose we should really also discuss how you've been doing during these last weeks. In fact, since the last time I saw you actually in Lahore, times have changed quite drastically since then.
yeah,
So I know that's quite a lot to take in, but I'd love to get your thoughts about that.
yeah, it feels really long ago that your show in Lahore happened and that we last met. Way longer than it has
Yeah.
been. So I created my first ceramic works, meaning I had worked with ceramics before. I had worked with ceramics in relation to other materials like foam, clay, or painted on ceramic objects, but these were ready-made. And the busts that I created were for your show were the first like hand-built ceramics that I had made. So, but it felt like a very natural progression almost, and it made a lot of sense because I am interested in these ideas of monument building, which is a key part of nation building and reinforcing certain personalities and ideologies. So and I was already painting, I was painting busts and structures and these things of importance, important objects that are commissioned by specific people. So then to actually build an object of importance, it your show presented a particular space that was very conducive to that. So that was great that I just got into the actual building. But obviously, it was the first time I had made a ceramic object without formal training. And it was very challenging. So then after your show, before quarantine, I had taken a few, I had just started taking beginning classes in ceramics, in building ceramic objects. Um, these days I have been experimenting a lot with both air dry and regular clay, and
Oh,
trying to,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, they're not beautiful sculptures. Well, no, they look like the things I make, but it's been a good time to experiment with different kinds of making. So I've been experimenting with building with ceramics. Um, and then I've also been experimenting with another class that I took recently. I actually took a bunch of classes before quarantine began. I feel lucky I got to do that. But in terms
That's
of
so productive
painting,
of you.
okay, we'll talk about productivity a little bit later because I can't claim to be too productive now. But what I had started to realize through my paintings, or where the paintings were, think more, involve myself more in ideas of flatness and painting. Spaces within painting and flatness within painting. And so the Rangoon Foundation, they have this program called the VMCTA, and they offer these excellent courses in Karachi. So they had an
Okay.
intro to miniature painting class, like a taster course. And I'm not ready to go back to school to become a miniature painting or anything. And I'm not attempting to do one either because that would take years of obviously learning to do
Yeah,
that.
it's a very careful, difficult
Yeah,
process to create a
but it's
miniature
just for a
painting.
painter like me who paints so fast and rapidly and thinks of space in a very different way. Now that narratives are starting to enter the paintings, it was very interesting for me to observe how the instructor was working on such a small scale, because my scale is generally
Oh,
larger.
interesting.
So he was working on such a small scale for so long, and there's just so much presence and skill, and just it was incredible. So, and they're still, if anyone is interested, they've started doing some online courses as well. I think there's one on miniature painting on flowers soon. So I have been also
Oh,
experimenting with space and slowing down within my paintings. So I try and get to the studio every day, which is in my house, but it's not always possible because I mean, I have a 3-year-old, Liana, and she is not in school, but she also can't go anywhere else. And although I have a lot of like support, it's still a lot to um, have, you know, this toddler around, and there are other things also that need to be done at home.
Has she
So
inherited her mummy's artistic skills?
I mean, she's very small right now, so I'm trying not to like. I mean, she thinks she's an artist, but I've not said this. Like, yeah, I've not tried to impose my life or career on her at all. So I like let her do what she wants, and she's much more particular than me. She doesn't like to get very messy, but she's very
Oh
specific. So
no.
we do build.
Yeah.
I mean, we do actually. You can see there's a shelf here, and this is her shelf in my studio, and we make things together and they go on that shelf, and we're not allowed to touch them. And she'll direct
Oh
me, and
dear.
we'll make these crafts together, and then like they'll just sit on shelves and we won't get to touch them or do anything to them. I just have to like dust
How
them, and she comes
sweet.
and looks at them every day, refuses to play with them or engage with them. But I guess I have been making stuff with her a lot, just it's a different kind of making. It's a lot of cardboard and markers.
Basically, what many of you don't know, I mean, or well, Sophia has told you, is that she is a little toddler. She's also a wife. She is a professor. She's teaching at Indus, and she's somehow managing to keep all of these different balls up in the air, which I think is so fascinating. And I think, especially in today's day and age, especially in times like Corona and when we're all in quarantine, this is something that a lot of parents are struggling with. Where you have to kind of manage your kid, you have to manage your career, you have to manage home responsibilities. And so it's really cool to hear from Sophie how she's managing all of it. Oh, good. Yes, you are back. I asked Sophie if she could show us a little sneak peek of maybe something that's in her studio. Now, she's very kindly shared Liana's work with us, but I also wanted to kind of catch a quick glimpse of something Sophia had been working on, or perhaps even a painting that's just decorating the wall, just so we could see some of the magic happening that's already in process.
Can you see? Because my screen is dark. Are you able to see?
I can see you, yes.
Okay. I mean, I can show you what's happening. The
That's
purple
very
vase
cool.
is an old object. The pink face is one of the generals, an older one. It was promised to a
Hmm.
friend, and my friend never got that. So it's with
Oh
me.
no.
I
So
didn't
it's
want to
up
let
for
it go.
grabs or no?
No, it's living with me until I, yeah, decide otherwise. Um, I can show you a quick, like it's a bit of a mess. There's a lot
Oh
happening.
wow, look at that wall.
But obviously,
There's
like
a lot
the
happening.
so I often in my work I work with the frames first, and then the work comes after. It's I'm interested in inverting what the portrait frame or what a object of decoration is meant to do. And in my case, the frame really
Mm.
reinforces the work within or dictates it in a way. So, you know, I've worked a lot with these colorful fiberglass frames, which are very much an extension of the work itself, and then a lot of these golden, more baroque frames, which I find ready-made, and then the canvas is stretched or placed within after, and the painting happens half inside, half outside. And now I'm working with a lot of velvet. So some of the frames are in velvet,
With
but
velvet. Oh, very cool.
also the columns and the pillars in the show in Lahore, those were also constructed of foam and pipes and velvet. This sort of fancy to give it this extra oomph and fanciness to add to the already
No,
decorated, very important men.
and you know, they did. I mean, I had so many people who were coming in. Now, what Sophia was referring to was an exhibition that I curated in Lahore, which we mentioned briefly with Kumail last time as well. It was called the Sagar Theatre on Queen's Road, and it was held at the Old Plaza Cinema in Lahore, and it was a collateral to the Lahore Biennale. Now, Sophia was one of the artists in it. And for those of you who may have visited and those of you who didn't, that's, as she was saying earlier, that's the first time that she sort of created ceramic busts. And those busts were then placed on these, would you call it teal blue, or no, more of a vivid, brighter blue pillars
Yeah, they
that were
definitely feel. I think they're
velvet
definitely teal.
teal and quite ornate. And they were showstoppers. I mean, everybody who sort of came by would go and look at them. And what I've actually found very exciting as well was people's reactions when they look at the titles. So if you do want to tell us a little bit about the titles you keep for your figures as well and your paintings.
The titles are kind of often a jab at what the objects or what the paintings are trying to do. So the figures in the paintings, or the figures that are the objects, they're very important. They're very important because of who they are, or what position they occupy. And they are obviously, I keep using the word decorated because it is very important, but especially the figures in your show, I kind of thought of them as having this kind of a colonial hangover in a way. This pathetic attempt at being grand, because they're not very polished. They look kind of sad, but they're trying really hard to be important. So then the other objects that live around them, whether it's the frames that decorate them, or the velvet and thread tassels that are hanging from them, the height of the pillars, everything is an attempt to sort of to overcompensate almost, to give these figures and beings importance. They need that extra padding or framing or positioning in a way. And their titles are often, there's a whole series of, I think there were 24 paintings at a show I had done in Lahore. It was called Heroes and Others. And they had names that were kind of humorous and strange. So they were a play on fruits and men and their positions, and a play of some Urdu names, some English names, some actual titles given to commanders and people in the government. But then, it was a mix between silly and serious. And sometimes they're just called things like very important leader 1, very important leader 2, going up to like 8 or 9. So the titles are really important for me. They're fun to work with, but they are definitely a big part of the work. Naming takes very long. But it is a big part of it, and it does also serve to disarm them in some way and make fun of them almost.
How interesting. I wanted to ask you, Sophia, if you would indulge me and talk a little bit about perhaps key moments that have stuck with you throughout your career or your life that may have a working process or may just be important to you as an individual. If you could just give me a couple of those, that'd be great. Was there anything that stuck with you particularly?
I mean, many things. I think going for my MFA was a huge turning point in my life, in my practice. I'd always wanted to be an artist, but I wasn't sure what kind of artist I wanted to be. And being in that space where I was able to take so many classes and had access to this, to academia in this way, and to have all these conversations that were multidisciplinary, that was definitely a huge turning point for me. Apart from that, recently, well, when you had your show in London that I was a part of, I went for the first time to the British Library, and they have an incredible East India Company archive. So I spent a great deal of time there looking at photographs, not only photographs, but also looking at drawings, specifically the drawings of this British General William Eden, who had depicted different parts of colonial India through his drawings. So I think spending a few days
What a treasure
with
trove.
Yeah, there's a lot, and they're really amazing. A lot of their stuff is online. You can access a bunch of it online as well, and then some of the stuff is obviously it's sensitive material, and it can't be shared. So, you know, you request it, they take it out for you. You read a description, they don't have an image of it necessarily, and you look through the material they give you, and you find what you need.
You said becoming a mom for the first time as well.
Yeah, so I think I'm a very structured person in the way that I work and I think and everything. And I've always been a bit rigid in that way. So,
Yeah.
but after having my daughter, I realized that even if I plan everything, an infant and then a toddler is not necessarily going to listen. I know it sounds obvious, but it was shocking for me because I had read all these books and thought I could like plan everything. But that doesn't always happen. So then that made me a little more spontaneous in terms of the way I structured things, or gave me more flexibility in the way I approached my work and projects. So that was a huge way that impacted the way I thought about my work, but also the fact that it's hard to leave an infant or a toddler and go off for a residency. So
Yeah, of course.
I did take Liana for one residency. I went to the 18th Street Art Center in
Wow.
Santa Monica. It was just for a month. It was very, very tough, extremely tough, and distracting. But I mean, it was literally, I think it's one of the few that allow you to bring a child, and there's so few that
That's
I
great, by the
really
way, and
admire.
so important.
Yeah, but I really have so much more admiration for these artists who have made it to where they've made it by being mothers. You see Naiza, you see Adila Suleiman, Naila Mahmood, you see Shazia Sikandar. They're all moms. Even
Wow.
the young moms, Sabah Khan is running this incredible residency program, and her kids are part of it. Varda Shabir is killing it. And I mean, she has
It's
a
true. It's
daughter.
actually I mean, I think people forget that, which is something that I was saying earlier, that people forget that a lot of female artists, are also mummies, are also moms, they're working mothers. And so to be able to manage having your kids, managing your career, going for these residencies, I mean, I was so thrilled that you were able to come for the opening of the exhibition in London as well. And, it's difficult to take time away from your little baby, obviously.
And of course, it comes with having a support system and privilege, right? Like it was a
Yeah.
privilege that I got to come, and I'm very grateful for it. But it's still hard, and there's always guilt. And sometimes I just wonder what it would be like to not have that guilt. Um,
Yeah, no, don't feel guilty about it, because I'm sure when Liana gets older as well, as the child of, I think she would be extremely grateful to know that you are able to manage everything. And I think she would completely understand that for your career, for your life, you also needed to take small trips to focus on that as well.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's also like you speak to painters and you speak to the artists who've done it, like Amra Abbas as well.
Yeah.
Like look at where she has, look at her work and what she's been doing. It's really inspiring and commendable.
Sophie, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about your curating and some of the other projects that I know you've been taking on. I know you do Karachi. I always call it Karachi.pk, but I know it's just Karachi. And I was wondering whether you could chat a little bit about those and a little bit about how they also work with your larger practice. Do they inform it at all? Do they come within it? How do you see some of those projects?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging to do these different things. I wish it was as easy as a switch that goes on and off and you're like into one project out of another. So I do kind of work on these projects in blocks.
Yeah.
Karachi is I mean, I'm a proud illustrator. I know there are these hierarchies in the art world and these conversations about illustration and art, but I'm very much an illustrator. And Karachi is this platform for that it's collaborations between illustration, design, animation. Animation is also something I'm really interested on. I'm working on an animation which will probably never, I don't know when it'll finish.
Oh,
It's
cool.
a very slow process. But curatorially, through this platform, I get to work with a lot of designers, animators, illustrators, multidisciplinary artists. There's a number of architects as well. And we've had animation screenings, one with a local community cinema called Cinema 73, where we curated locally produced animations, which was wonderful. Because I mean, the animation scene is obviously it's growing, but it is small and it does require a lot of support. And we've done workshops on collaborating drawing, zine making, publications. And right now, obviously,
Wow.
with COVID-19, we created this set of it was in collaboration with a non-profit, the Zindagi Trust, that was working with government schools, and we created a set
Yeah, I
of
saw that.
activity sheets for them, very generously created by different artists, and they all allowed for their work to be put up free to download and print for this organization who is dropping off care packages to these schools. They're old students who a lot of don't have internet access and are stuck in their homes, but also just free to download and print for everyone to use. So I mean, that is one project. And then apart from that, I guess so. I worked with CAP. I worked on the National History Museum in Lahore. That was an incredible project that I worked
That
on.
must have been really great for you, especially with your interest in archives and history.
Yeah, I think that was a very important and formative project for me. So a lot of even the work that I'm doing now, it's very much influenced by my experience in that project. And now that I'm no longer part of it, I continue to reflect on it and think about it, and even it becomes part of my critique and my work as well. And then apart from that, there's Soft Bodies. So Soft Bodies was a
Tell me about
show.
that.
Were you here? Did you visit it? I don't remember if you were here.
I don't think I was in town, but I'd love to hear about it and your vision for it.
Well, it was in 2018. I won't go into it too much, but it was a project that was thinking what it was supposed to be was an exhibition, but also a series of conversations and writings about the female body in places where it doesn't fit, and and by that I mean someone who is born into the female body and dealing with those sets of politics. And there was a really incredible artist list, but there were also writers, Sadia Khatri, who's a fantastic writer, Neha Mashikula, who's a great writer, Sanam Meher, and then there were performances, there were readings.
Okay.
So yeah, that was a project that I'm really proud of, and that at some point, I
Yeah.
mean, it is supposed to continue. I was supposed to be working on the second rendition right now, but I am taking it a bit slow. I am going easy on
I
myself.
think that's fine.
I'm not trying to I'm not expecting myself to be too productive right now. I'm just doing the best I can. So I'm trying to think sustainably about Soft Bodies and about all the other projects that I'm working on.
But that's great. It sounds as you're so busy even now. I mean, despite your saying that you're taking things slowly. I want to pause because I think we got a really great question, which I'd love to ask you. Sahar, thank you. It's what about combining soft bodies in Karachi and doing something digital? How do you feel about that, Sophia?
I think that is the way a lot of us have to start thinking about our practices, because I think that it is going to this is going to be a while. It's not this short thing that we're going to experience and then we'll all go back to our regular lives. And we shouldn't. We should really think about what is necessary, what is not, how we're making, how responsibly we are making. How responsibly we're making and existing because of this experience. So I think a lot of things are going to become digital. And I have had a conversation with one of the artists that I was talking to about Soft Bodies about how this could become a digital a digital project, start as a blog,
That's such a
have
good
continuous
idea.
conversations with different artists about it, and then maybe the exhibition itself is something that's digital and is thinking about an exhibition beyond just the gallery space, which I think a lot of practitioners, a lot of institutions, they're all considering and thinking about this now. You have to.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know that, for example, Sotheby's had a digital sale and it did very well. So I think even artists, I mean, venues like Instagram, which is how I first saw your work, are, so relevant. And that's what we're using for this conversation as well. And sometimes one wonders with even social distancing with people. I mean, Kumail talked about it a little bit last week about how with social distancing, people not wanting to be too close to each other. How then would gallery exhibitions change? Would they also become more digital and more online? And do you think that's something that, artists can really take advantage of if they're not represented by a gallery, if they don't have, is it better for them to have complete control over the way that their work is portrayed than through their Instagram accounts or through websites?
I mean, you
It'd be
never
great to
really
get your
have
thoughts on that.
control, right? Once you put the work
Yeah,
out there, even if you write
that's
the
true.
caption and frame it and position it in a certain way, once it's out
Yeah.
there, it exists and it's made when another person engages with it, right? But yeah, it goes both ways. There are advantages of having a gallery and having that, sense of slight comfort that, okay, I'll be okay. This gallery has my back. But galleries are, some of them are struggling as well. I would love to know your take on this, Zahra, since you are a gallerist and a curator. How are you? How are you thinking about this, and what is your plan?
That's something I've been thinking about as well, actually. I know that a lot of galleries then are putting on exhibitions online. A lot of curators are putting exhibitions online. In my experience, I personally love being immersed in an artwork and seeing it live, sort of larger than life ahead of me. That's kind of the premise I've used for a lot of the shows that I've worked on as well. But it is something that one does need to be able to utilize properly. And I think venues like Instagram or Facebook or whatever are great platforms because there's also this feeling of equalness on them, which I think sometimes, especially in the art world, people can feel a little bit nervous about going to an exhibition or a museum or really putting out their work, feeling that it may not be good enough, or even art critics feeling that their opinions are not correct enough. And I think social media and the online digital world neutralizes that space in a sense where everybody is able to have their say and can put forward their work. Yes, there's a lot of judgment afterwards, but at least the venues are there for people to take advantage of them. So I think it's a great thing, actually.
Well, there's always judgment, right? Like, this is the
That's
artwork.
true. That's very true. Should
But I
we
guess,
open it up to questions, do you think? I'll read it to you. Sophia, are all of your projects listed somewhere like your website? CAP and the Zindagi Trust one that you mentioned earlier, would love to learn more about them.
I'm really active on Instagram. Most of my projects are listed on my website. Most of my projects are there, and apart from that, everything is on Instagram. Yeah, I am. I do post on it on and off, but I always share stuff that I'm doing on my stories. If not as a
Yeah, you're
post.
very active. It's great.
I'm like really moody, to be honest. Like I try and I get this like random pressure that I need to like, share, and then I suddenly become very anxious and stressed and delete stuff and don't want to share anymore and just want to hide. I have a very conflicting relationship with Instagram and sharing my work there, but even if I don't
That
commit to
makes
it,
sense. I mean,
there's
your work is
definitely
like your babies, right? So you're placing it out there for the world to see.
yeah, and it's also a public account. So, when you do that, you get more anxiety as well, I guess. And it can be really amazing. You meet wonderful people. A lot of the artists from Soft Bodies I met through Instagram. You and I met through Instagram.
Really? Yes,
Uh,
you and I did.
so it's
You,
definitely
I think,
very,
are the
very
only
good.
person I've met through Instagram.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, here's another question. Let's see. There seems to be a common thread across your work with a long mustache wearing character. Is there any meaning or inspiration behind this character? This is by Tahir Zafar. I mean, we addressed this earlier, but Sophia, do you want to go into more details about that?
I mean, the mustache is something that locally has a history, but not just in Pakistan. If you look at the Middle East, if you look at Turkey, if you look at South America, in fact, even in England, the mustache has often played a role of, really symbolizing this sense of macho-ness and manliness. And one of the things I question is the idea of what masculinity or what having authority and power really means. And when you look at history of the subcontinent, when the British generals were taking over the Indian army, there was an issue with respect. They couldn't, they found it very hard to respect their superiors because of no facial hair. And so happening was the generals positioned in India, they started to grow and groom their mustaches, making them a lot more robust and larger, to have that command over the armies. And then obviously this is something that went back home and became, not that it was non-existent there, but it did definitely cause more of a trend back in England as well. So yeah, the mustache is means so many different things to so many different contexts and communities. And I definitely use the mustache a lot in my work to depict and question different things.
It's quite the sign of machoism in a sense, right? And power and bravery. So yeah, of course. And the way that you turn it over then with having those sort of pastel colors is always quite well done. Sophia, what do you think? Do you have any questions?
Yeah, so
yes,
I
go
just
ahead.
like to talk a little bit about the shows that we've worked on together. Specifically, the series of shows that you had with Rossi, in terms of what that project was and how you see it happening or not happening in the future. Because I think that was a really important project for all of the artists involved, for me as well.
Well, yeah, so essentially I run an art foundation called Art Divvy. And I try and divide the projects that I do into two major categories in a sense. They're very much about highlighting artists from Pakistan, contemporary artists in particular. And within the country, about, emphasizing the in national institutions. So for example, the exhibition that I curated first was of Imran Qureshi and Aisha Khalid at the National Art Museum in Islamabad and the PNCA National Art Gallery. And then the next exhibition, which you were also a part of in Lahore, was at the Fakir Khana Museum, which is a private museum in Lahore Center City. And once I did these two shows, I really wanted to highlight what contemporary younger artists are doing in Pakistan, but to a London and global audience, because I myself am usually based in London. And so I collaborated with a gallery in London called Rossi and Rossi, and very kindly they agreed. And I've curated now 3 exhibitions there. Each show has had 5 artists whose work I think is, extremely important, very representative of contemporary art trends within Pakistan, and yet not, run of the mill. So Sophia was part of, I believe, the 3rd show called The Perfect Gentleman. And the exhibition also had the work of Abdullah Qureshi, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Maria Khan, and South Baloch. And I think every exhibition has a different theme, and the idea is to really give a platform, because now they're not being a contemporary art gallery focused on Pakistani art anymore in London. I thought it was important to fill that void. And since I am very, I know a lot of the artists in Pakistan now, I've worked with many of them over the years. And I like being able to take their work to London, exhibit it to people there, and really build young collectors based in London to start building up their own collections. And I think that's quite important. So yeah, that was the purpose of the series. And then of course, within Pakistan, I did continue on. So I did the Sagar Theatre show that Sophia was talking about earlier at the Lahore Biennale 2nd edition. And I also curated Pakistan's first pavilion at the Venice Art Biennale last year with Naiza Khan's work. So that was a really important and exciting experience for me, because Venice to me anyway, is the very epitome of the art world, and being able to sort of place the mark of a contemporary Pakistani artist in a national pavilion representing the country was an amazing opportunity and an experience that I was very proud to have pushed forward quite a lot.
Zahra, so is this going to be a weekly thing? Do you have any updates for Ramzan or the rest of the month or the coming months in terms of these artists?
Yeah, I'm planning to have this every week, actually. I'm trying to set Wednesdays as the time, as the date. I think it's a good day to do it midweek. And I'm hoping to keep it at the same time because it's after, iftar, after Isha, all of that. It's at 9:30. And it's a time that works well for the different continents that we have friends and, colleagues in. So here in the UK, in the States as well, I think that this is a time that is quite helpful for everyone. So I'm planning to, start this series. I think it's important for people to get to know the artists face to face in that sense, really know their personalities, understand what else they have going on in their lives, the thought process behind some of their work. Just like you spoke about, so much more than I think is often evident, because there are so many layers of research and weeks and months of work that go into every single project and painting, that it's nice to be able to bring that forward. Sophia, someone is asking, any tips on marketing art? Do you have any?
I think Zahra would be better for that. I don't think I'm very good at this, and I don't want to really market. Yeah, I think you need a curator or a gallerist like Zahra. Send her a message.
Thank you. That is high praise, I have to say. Thank you. But guys, thank you so much for everything. You've been the most remarkable audience. I'm so grateful to all of you. Sophia, you have been an absolute star. As always, it's so special to hear about your work and to hear about the new projects that you're working on, how you've been busy. And I really, really appreciate you taking out the time on a Wednesday night to chat to all of us about it.
Thank you, Zahra, and thank you everyone who joined us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as